Hey everyone, this is Pete, and welcome back to Atari ST A to Z, a series of short playthroughs of Atari ST games, some which I grew up with and some which are new to me. Today is one of the latter, though I did play the sequel to this game, which I'm sure will come up at some point. Today we're looking at Test Drive from Accolade, which was a 1987 release that was also distributed by Electronic Arts in some parts of the world, and it was developed by a company called Distinctive Software. Now, Distinctive Software is noteworthy from a historical perspective as being the place where a guy called Don Mattrick got his start at the age of 17. Mattrick is best known for various things in the more recent years, so he's been in charge of Zynga, but he also was the president of Worldwide Studios for Electronic Arts. Distinctive Software actually became EA Canada, if I remember rightly. And he was also president of Microsoft's Interactive Entertainment division during the Xbox 360 years and the early years of the Xbox One. So, Test Drive itself is a very long-running series that I'm sure will come up again either on this series or on some of the other series that are on this channel. But this is where it all began, and I've never actually played this version, so I've always been curious to. So, let's go play Test Drive. Okay, here we are with Test Drive by Accolade. Excuse the flickering screen as always. I'm running this from a one of the automation compilation discs because that's just the easiest way to get some footage recorded without having to do lots of disc swapping and all that sort of thing. So there may be a bit of flickering in the background as it decompresses things and loads. But there you go. Anyway, this is Test Drive from 1987, and there's Don Mattrick's name right there, along with the other people who worked on this. So Don Mattrick formed Distinctive Software when he was 17 years old. This wasn't his first game by any means, but this is probably one of his most well-known ones from back in the era. Okay, so the concept of Test Drive is, I mean, it's fairly self-explanatory by the name. You are given a selection of fancy cars and you take them out for a drive, and that's about it. I believe there's 5 stages. They're all based on this sort of winding cliffside road, so they all look pretty similar. But that's about it. What happened with the sequel, Test Drive 2, The Duel, which we'll look at some point, is it added the possibility for expansion discs, so discs with more cars, discs with more scenery, so different tracks to race on, and it also made it into a race. So rather than just racing against the clock as you do here to try and get the best possible score across the 5 stages, you were racing against an opponent. You could still race against the clock if you wanted to, but the big thing with it was that it was a duel between different cars. Initially between the Porsche 911 Turbo that you can see here and the Ferrari Testarossa, which is somewhere in this list. But you see, there's a nice mix of different cars in here. There it is. There's the Ferrari Testarossa. Let's take that one, actually. You know, it's an iconic car. It's the car that isn't in Outrun. It's just based on it, which is why you can still buy copies of Outrun these days, whereas Outrun 2 is nowhere to be seen anywhere on any digital storefronts because Sega's license with Ferrari expired, and it wasn't relevant for the original Outrun. So, fun fact. There you go. Anyway, so I was always fascinated by this game back in the day. I've told this story a number of times on this series already. But when I was a kid, I was fascinated by games that provided a simulation of doing something from a first-person perspective. So, in this case, driving. So I was really excited by the possibility of a game that looked like real driving, or at least as close as possible as you were going to get to something that looked like real driving in 1987 anyway. Oh dear, I crashed. So yeah, this game appealed enormously to me because you could pretend you were sitting in a car and driving, which I was really excited about. And it didn't matter to me that
the game wasn't really about racing as such. In fact, the fact that you were just going out for a drive in these cars is what appealed specifically to me about Test Drive and its sequels. The only thing that frustrated me a little bit was that you didn't really have any freedom. You just have this one continuous ongoing road to drive on, and that's it. Now that did change a little bit later with the release of Test Drive 3, The Passion. But by the time that came out, the series had moved pretty much exclusively to PC. And so I actually never had the chance to play that, and having sort of looked at footage of it since, it seems it didn't quite live up to what I would have wanted it to be. However, as you'll see... Oops. Blew my engine. As you'll see on Short Play later this week, they would later return to this concept with a game called Test Drive Unlimited. And that game is what I wanted Test Drive to be when I was a kid. A game that provides you with an open world that you can take these cars around in. Still learning to shift on you. Average speed was 68 miles per hour and it took you 2 minutes and 31 seconds. It's worth 3,565 points. Yeah, so you proceed through these stages, you stop at the gas station at the end of each stage, and it gives you an assessment of how well you've been doing. Which is not very well from the look of things. But yeah, Test Drive Unlimited we'll talk more about when I actually show that off in the short play video, but I was really excited to see that game because it is what I'd always wanted the Test Drive series to actually be. Ever since I played the sequel to this game specifically. But this is still fun. This is a pretty solid effort at a first-person driving game for the Atari ST. And it's noteworthy for not being your standard vanishing point racer. The track here is actually constructed from polygons. This gives it a much more convincing sense of being 3D and a feeling less like you're sliding from side to side across the road and more like you're actually turning around corners and crashing into cliffs. Now, Test Drive 2 actually added a lives mechanic into this, so you could only crash 5 times before your race was over. I don't believe that's present in this version. All that happens is if you crash, it just wastes a bunch of time because you have to start your car again and accelerate up to full speed and all that. I do find it just a tiny bit tricky to judge where it considers your car to be on the road in relation to things like the other vehicles and stuff in particular. Just because the perspective isn't quite right in a few places. But I mean, it's a solid effort, and this was sort of very early days for trying to do this sort of thing. That was a bit of round, wasn't it? Right, round 3. Ooh, bumpy road. Yeah, so obviously this is sort of nothing special to look at now, but back in the day, what this game offered was really quite impressive, because you have unique cockpits for each of the vehicles. You have unique handling for each of the vehicles, so each of them sort of has its own handling, top speed, acceleration, all that sort of thing. And then you've got little details, like you may have noticed a little while back a bird shat on my windscreen. And like it's just little details like that that no one had ever bothered to put in a racing game before. Whoops. I love that you can see the faces of the drivers you crash into. And so yeah, I feel very much what they had with Test Drive here is a proof of concept more than anything. Because the actual sort of game side of things was fleshed out considerably in the sequel with the whole dual aspect. And sort of having lives and things like that as well. Oh, you can get a game over. Okay, so you can only crash a certain number of times. That's good to know. I didn't count how many times that was though. Anyway, let's have a go with another car. You have qualified as one of Test Drive's best drivers. I am Pete. Excuse me. Neil is the best. I am the worst of the best drivers, it seems. Right, let's take another car out. Choose a new car. And this time I think we'll take the Lotus. Because the Lotus is one of my favourite cars in Test Drive Unlimited. And so I'm interested to see how it compares in this one. So let's give it a try. But yeah, it was really cool to see this back in the day, because so many racing games were still following the sort of pole position outrun formula, and there was nothing wrong with that. I love those kinds of games, but whenever I played them, I always found myself wondering what it would be like to play something that was a bit more like driving a real car. I mean, obviously I was aware that nothing was ever going to be truly realistic given the technology at the time. I understood that even back then, but this series provided what I wanted in that regard. I could sit in front of my ST monitor with this lovely recreation of an expensive car's cockpit, and I could pretend I was driving it. And oh, I did. Of course, when you get older, you realise that driving a car is actually quite boring for the most part. Even if it is a fancy shiny car like a Lotus Turbo Esprit. Actually saying that, I imagine it is probably quite fun to just go out for a drive in a Lotus Esprit, as long as you don't think too much about how much it's going to cost you in petrol. That's always the downside, isn't it? Petrol and maintenance. Whoops. But yeah, you don't have to worry about fuel in this one because you'll notice it automatically pulls into the gas station at the end of each round. In Test Drive 2, you had to stop manually. And if you overshot the gas station by even like an inch, you would lose a life because you ran out of fuel. And there was no possibility that you could push your car back to the gas station even though it was just inches behind you at this point. Nope, you messed up. Learn to stop. But you see there, I didn't have to do anything there. It just pulls into the gas station for you because you reached the end of the course. Trying out for the Indy. Average speed was 74 miles per hour and it took 2 minutes and 8 seconds. That's much faster than I did it in that Ferrari, wasn't it? Even though I believe the Lotus is a slower car than the Ferrari. Just goes to show that speed isn't everything. There is actually a certain degree of simulation going on here as well. Like when you're going uphill, there's a feeling that the car is struggling to accelerate. And obviously the reverse is true for going downhill. But yeah, this is one of those games that it's enjoyable to just spend some time with. It doesn't really have an objective besides get as far as you can, as fast as you can. But just the feeling of immersing yourself in the experience and just having a good time, I think, is what this game has always been about. And what a lot of the series has always been about. As I'll talk about more when we look at Test Drive Unlimited. While that game does have plenty of structure for you to explore from the single player perspective, you can also just play it just driving around with no objective whatsoever. And that's a fun thing to do. And I'm all for games that are just experiences to be had. And that's certainly what you get here. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of things it could do better. It would be nice to have a bit more variety in the tracks. That engine noise is like an angry mosquito in your ear. Ooh, average speed 101 miles per hour. Very nice. But most of those things are addressed in the sequel. Which is why I say this game feels very much like a proof of concept. We're saying, look, this is a plausible idea for a game. Let's get this basic concept working, and then, whoops, and then we'll flesh it out into something more substantial for the sequel, which is exactly what they did. So I'll try and make a point of highlighting the sequel on this series at some point. I think technically it's called The Duel Test Drive 2, so I could probably get away with including it under D for Duel, but we'll see. We'll see. Because like I say, that's the version of this game that I'm much more familiar with, and so it's going to be interesting to compare and contrast what the two versions do. One particularly noteworthy thing that the sequel does is it replaces all of this sound generated by the ST sound chip with digitized sounds, which makes a huge difference, as you might expect. Not just for the engine sound, but also things like it has digital music as well, which is very cool. There's a sound when you crash in the second one, which seems conspicuously absent from this game. Oh dear. Oh dear, it's going very poorly all of a sudden. I feel like we're probably going to hit a game over at some point again, but we'll see. Getting much tighter corners in these later stages. Maybe I should slow down a bit for them. No, I still crashed. Good. Fuck braking then, I guess. One thing you do have to be prepared for in this game, if you've grown up with sort of more recent racing games, is that you do have to do all the gear shifts yourself in this. I mean, it's just a case of pressing the fire button while you're pushing up or pulling back on the stick. But yeah, it is something worth remembering. And as we've seen a few times in this episode already, you can blow your engine if you rev too high for too long. You drive like my grandmother. Yeah, that was a poor effort. Let's see how we get on with this. Is stage 4 or 5? I've kind of lost count. Bumpy road. Oh, that little red flashing thing at the top, if you're wondering, that is a police radar. So you see there's a police car behind me. You can see it in the rearview mirror. Which is a fully working rearview mirror, I might add. Which is not something we'd ever really seen in driving games at this point. And so it's not just a rearview mirror that just shows when there's a car behind you, because that doesn't really matter in this game because you're not racing them as such, but it does actually just show you the scenery behind you. Which is very impressive for the time. Oh no! I think what might happen in this is you might have a certain number of lives for each stage, which is why I've been able... Yeah, there we are. So I guess you probably have 5 lives for each stage, and then that resets when you start a new stage and so on. So you can get a game over partway through. Alright, I think that's probably enough of that for now. That was Test Drive for Atari ST. Yeah, really fun experience. and proof of concept for what will come later in the series. A very long series, as it happens. And as I say in the intro, I was very surprised to discover the other day that they are presently working on a new Test Drive Unlimited game, which is very exciting, because just recently I've just been getting back into the original Test Drive Unlimited and really having a good time with it. So seeing what a new one might look like on modern platforms is very exciting indeed. So I'll be keeping a close eye out for that. And I'm sure there will be some write-ups on Moe Gamer or some videos here on YouTube when that does show up. Anyway, for now, let's leave that behind. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.